Joanne is one of 7 currently living people born with the condition Tetra-Amelia Syndrome. In April 2012, she spoke before the UN and challenged the body to create technology to help disabled people such as herself. She was named Young Person of the Year at the People of the Year Awards in 2012. Joanne is an activist for people with disabilities, a motivational speaker, and a sports columnist with the Irish Times. She appears in the 2013 documentary No Limbs, No Limits, and she is currently training to become a solicitor. When speaking about your family, I think support is the word that comes to my mind. You know, how has their support helped you to maybe tackle the challenges that you've faced, maybe both as an activist and in your personal life?
Yeah, I think for my siblings more than anything, they just wanted me to do things that they were doing. So I remember when I was particularly young, they would have I think it was an Atari or PlayStation 1, one of the two of those anyway, and we'd be playing games on it and they threw the controller at me and they were like, just play it, lad. So I was very young at the time. So I was like, okay. So I hadn't a clue what I was doing. But ironically enough, then playing the Atari with them, that's actually how I got my first wheelchair when I was 2 years old. My oldest brother came with me to pick it up, and the people who were delivering it, these things are expensive kit. This wheelchair is 15 to 20,000, so handing it off to a 2-year-old wasn't the most ideal situation for all involved. So then we got it and they were like, she'll never drive it. And my brother was like, well, how do you drive it? And they were like, oh, there's a joystick, basically like an analog stick on a controller. So my brother was like, oh, Joanne, it's like Grand Theft Auto, just press it forward and you'll go. And I zoomed out of the warehouse and went home, basically. So I think it's just that kind of level of I suppose that expectation. I think they just always had such high expectations kind of no matter what, and even though they knew certain things were kind of different in terms of how I do it, they didn't really care if it took me 5 minutes longer. It didn't matter. But we're a very competitive family as well, so if it took me 5 minutes longer, they would challenge me to make sure that it was 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then I was eventually catching up to them. There's a lot of things I suppose that you have to credit them with for at the moment. So when I type, put a pen in my mouth and I bang on the keys like Woody Woodpecker, and basically at the moment I can do 42 words a minute. Oh. So yeah, that was important then later on in career choice, because when I was covering matches, you needed to get between 800 words to 1,000 words out in 20 minutes, because people want their articles now. So then that was a very useful skill, Little did I know when we were challenging each other to type offs that it would be worthwhile 20 odd years later. So yeah, I think, they all had an impact in their own little way. I guess me and Stephen were the two who were most obsessed with activism and trying to make things a little bit better. And he was always involved in different projects. I remember growing up he worked with the Magdalene Laundries, and he got the victims of the Magdalene Laundries an apology. For international viewers, basically it was when some aspects of the church basically had women working in laundries unpaid and stuff like that. So yeah, it was interesting kind of seeing that as well growing up. But then if you talk to my 2 older siblings, the Dennis and Danny, and I have my sister Gillian as well, they have no interest in any of this stuff. They actually couldn't care less. So it's interesting to see the difference in all the personality. So yeah, I think Stephen would have maybe had the big impact in terms of activism and stuff like that, but the other two, in terms of their competitiveness and making me do things a bit faster or quicker or whatever, that helped then later on in life for different jobs or anything that I was going for.
Sounds like you've learned quite a lot. I'm curious, if you can sum it down to one thing, what's the most important lesson your family has taught you that you carry with you in everything you do?
Resilience, I think, hands down, because we always used to beat each other up like normal siblings. And my eldest brother used to always say, life beats you down and you bounced back pretty fine when I beat you up. It's just one thing. I think no matter how many times, you'd fall or have an incident, it's just, getting up and trying to overcome that obstacle. So resilience was the big one, I think.
Yeah, I think that resilience obviously feeds into everything that you have done or that you're currently doing today. And I'd love to kind of go back to your introduction. And is it fair to say you first gained attention as a young activist when you did skip school that day to confront the Taoiseach and the Kenny?
Yeah, it was my junior cert mock. I was doing French, my junior cert French mock. Kind of ironic considering I needed it. Enda Kenny was in town, and I don't know, I guess my family were bad Fine Gaelers, and it was very exciting because they were very close to being, they were elected then the leaders after a long time. I literally only went to get a picture with him, and then my dad was like, I'm literally in Dad's office now actually, so if his boss is hearing, this didn't happen. But Dad basically would ask a good question because I didn't miss my lunch, for you to just get a picture and go home basically. So I was like, fine. So I was 15 at the time. So I basically asked him what would he do to protect, I guess, people with disabilities. And then that was in February, and then in December of that year, they made a cut to like the payments that are made for 16 to 18-year-olds. So like that was kind of my time of getting it. So it was a payment made for like whatever, like the child needed, like additionally, whatever it was. So they were making a cut to that payment, and they were skipping you on to an adult style payment, which I wouldn't have benefited from because I wasn't an adult, and it was my mother who was still receiving it, and she didn't want it. She wanted the child version so she could put it into education or college or whatever it is that I needed to do. So yeah, it didn't really make sense, and the money was cut significantly. And then I guess I had made friends with a journalist in the Irish Examiner, Owen English, and he reached out to me and he said, I know you want to be a journalist. Do you want to write something about this? So I was like, okay. I was in TY at the time. I was doing my BT Young Scientist project. Actually, my poor friend who was doing it with me, she was like, are you ever going to come back, or am I doing this on my own? I was like, I have no idea, girl. I basically wrote a letter like to the Irish Examiner, but to Enda Kenny, stating like how this cut was going to affect so many people in the similar position. And it made front page of the Irish Examiner, and that was really it.
So for those outside of Ireland, when Joanne is mentioning Enda Kenny and mentioning like the Irish Taoiseach, make things easy, we can make it the equivalent of the President of Ireland, essentially, we'd say. So when Joanne's talking about that, it's a pretty big deal for someone so young. And Joanne, I'd love to know like what motivated you, or what was going through your mind at the time. Like, were you scared to talk to someone of that much status? Did you not give two hoots, which is probably what I'm thinking, given how much I know you? I'm curious to know what your motivation was.
No, like I was a teenager, like a typical teenager, like you think the world revolves around you. I think definitely now I would have had some bit of decorum and vibe about me, whereas when you're a teenager, you don't really care, I think that was the big thing. And maybe in a way I was fortunate that I was a teenager, because you do have that fearlessness in you, like as a child, that's not really taken out of you until you're much, much older. So yeah, like it didn't really bother me, to be honest, but when other like things started coming in, so I guess basically the Late Late Show, which is like one of the biggest shows, live chat shows in Ireland, came then and they asked would I go on it? Obviously that was a huge moment. And again, because I was a teenager, I thought, well, why not? Like that was absolutely monumental, like looking back on it. I mean, like that show at the time got, I think, over 800,000 viewers because it was around the Christmas time. So yeah, like, I mean, that's huge for Ireland. Like that's nearly a quarter of the country nearly at that time anyway. So yeah, it was massive. And I guess you don't really realize the impact until you're like outside. But I think like now, having like got a bit older, like gone through college, done my year abroad, working in the jobs that I'm working in, I think it's only now you realize how significant that is. Like, when I was writing for the Irish Times and you'd be doing pieces, I think a lot of times you just forget how powerful, a piece can possibly be. And you actually don't know who's reading it at the end of the day. And I think that was the lucky thing with that Irish Examiner letter. We just didn't know who was reading it. And fortunately, the right people were reading it at the right time. And that's how it all happened.
Was that the most important lesson that you learned from confronting a world leader at such a young age?
I don't think probably I learned anything. I don't think as a teenager, like you're ready to learn things like that. I think, like I always say, it was only when I moved abroad to England for my college, for my Erasmus program, for my year abroad for college, that's probably when I realized most of the stuff that I did, because you find yourself in a situation where you're living with people that don't know you like at all, and they only see you as basically the girl with no limbs. So you're back to rebattling a stereotype that you would have overcame, when I had done all the stuff that I'd done in Ireland. So then all of a sudden they're like, why are you taking like random phone calls at radio stations, or like, why are you getting flowers from like random, like that's really bizarre. And then eventually you'd have to say, oh, I do this. And I think it was funny, not to skip ahead in the conversation, but it wasn't until, so the documentary, the one that my brother made about me, No Limbs, No Limits, basically it got called into an international film festival in Russia. So I had to go to Russia in the middle of my year abroad, and I was living in England at the time, and there was some diplomatic relations not going according to plan. So I was very close to not going solely because of that. And then the ambassadors called and they were like, okay, like you can go. So I went to Russia, and then my housemates were like, but why are you going to Russia? And I was like, like no reason. Because at the time I just wanted them to figure out who I was first, rather than actually, them being like, oh, she's on TV, and, them having a perception, or, them maybe treating you a bit differently. So my ideal situation was I wanted them to get to know me as, someone who is interested in sport, someone who likes to lounge because I'm very lazy, someone who likes chicken goujons, rather than like the girl who's done all these ridiculous things. Because, like people's perception is a huge thing as well, and that was one thing that I wanted to overcome before having to go into the TV thing. Now, if they did keep seeing me as a girl with no limbs, I was ready to launch into the TV stuff, but, that was basically my apparatus there.